Hi, morning, Mark, morning everyone.
Morning, Rachel.
How's it going?
Very good, yeah, all good.
Yeah,
Nice the weekend.
Yeah, and it's a lovely sunny day, so hopefully it is where everyone else is today. Thank you so much for joining. Mine and Mark's, I think, first ever LinkedIn live session. So what could possibly go wrong? Nothing, I'm sure. Over the next 40 minutes or so, we're going to be having a chat about something that seems very much a big topic at the moment, seeing it in the headlines, addressing the skills gap and specifically the importance of upskilling for marketing. We're seeing as well, and I think, it'd be interesting to talk about this later, Mark, a real kind of challenge around the credibility of marketing too and the professionalisation of our industry. And perhaps also, given the news from the Bank of England yesterday and the economic outlook, really interested in chatting about how upskilling can really play a role in driving business growth. Absolutely delighted, Mark, you've been able to join us. A marketing leader, recognised, I don't know how many times in awards and the likes. But I think what, Mark and I have chatted a lot about people in the past. And I think Mark's really a pioneer when it comes to building teams, nurturing people. So thank you so much, Mark, for giving up your time this morning to have a chat to us. Thanks everyone for joining us. Please do join our chat, put comments, questions, and then we can discuss those and bring you into it all too. So I guess first up, Mark, it'd be good to chat about the skills gap that is currently being hotly debated. I think there was some research, and it was from the Open University, that was saying a third of teams, according to business leaders, were correctly skilled. Do you think that is the reality in the data and marketing industry? Do we have a challenge?
Well, hi, Rachel. Firstly, thank you for being here. Very flattering intro. Really happy to be here because I think it's a super important subject. I think the role of the marketing leader is to create a context and a culture for their teams to thrive. And thrive really means having the right skills for the job. And all too often it's the thing that gets missed. So as I said, really, really pleased to be here. Is there a skills gap? Yes, of course there is, because the world is changing so fast. And so there will always be a gap. And I love the expression or the saying, heard a while back, you shouldn't ask yourself, what do I know? You should ask, am I learning fast enough? And I think that feels like the nature of the world. And as I said, all too often, skills do get overlooked. People don't passionately own their own personal development plan. Mm-hmm. And the ... is, as you've rightly said, this is all part of why marketing as a profession is perhaps lacking a bit of respect and understanding in the boardroom and beyond. So I think it's all part of a big conundrum for marketing as a profession. So great to be able to dive into that in more detail.
Yeah. What do you think's causing the skills gap? You talk about the responsibility of the marketing leader. Is it something that we're just not focusing on as leaders, and hence individuals aren't taking the ownership either? Why as an industry, perhaps compared to other industries, does skills and this, obviously we talk a lot, and I think more broadly in business we're seeing a focus on digital skills, but why are we failing to upskill our teams and professionalize our industry, perhaps in a way other industries are able to?
Well, I think it is multifaceted, and definitely there's a bit about there isn't an obvious professional structure. But I'm just noticing Daniel's comment already, and he's moved as an apprentice into the marketing team within Direct Line. And this is one part of the conundrum. What Daniel has shown is proactivity. And a part of it is individuals not realizing that, frankly, don't expect anybody to give a crap about your own development. It's up to you. You have to own it. I mean, you might be lucky and have a line manager or a business or whatever that is very active in promoting people and helping people to progress, but you really can't bet on it. So I think there's one thing, which is, you've got to own your own development. That's probably, it all starts there. But beyond that, I mean, I suppose, marketing does lack the professional structure of accountancy and law, which I think is a good and a bad. It means that you can write your own story, you can create your own journey, but it's not as obvious about how you move through a typical hierarchy of a profession. Mark Ritson talks very loudly about the lack of professionalization. And I think the consequence is that, sometimes people struggle without an obvious structure, but also there's nothing really to hang your hat on amongst boardroom or exec peers in terms of how I am professionalizing my function. You have to talk to capabilities or skills or pillars, and we've all been there with that. But it's not the same as, I've got 80 people going through actuarial exams this year. So, it's all about ownership, self-ownership, and focus. Because of course, the other aspect here is that there's always distraction. We'll go on to talk about an hour a week in terms of micro upskilling, but there's always something else more pressing unless you really make time. So that again comes back to the passion for your own development and being ambitious in the right way. But if you're not ambitious for yourself, then don't expect anybody else to be so.
Yeah, and that's really interesting when you look at your own pathway as well, because I guess, data and marketing is broad, isn't it? So when you're looking at everyone's pathway through this industry, whereas maybe an accountant has a very clear one direction. I'm not that familiar with accountancy careers, but my general view of things is there's not too many routes to follow. Whereas in data and marketing, there are many. So I guess in terms of not only identifying the skills you need, but where you want to go with those as well, is super important. And understanding from the outset where you want to go isn't always the case, is it? I think there is a lot of self-discovery in data marketing where you're working out what you enjoy, what you're good at, and then being able to map your skills pathway against that. Yeah,
I mean, of course, when you say data and marketing, the fusion of the two, data as a very scientific pursuit and marketing as somewhat less so. The two have really come together in the last decade. That's the raison d'etre for the DMA, of course. Yeah. And it just goes to show that the profession is fast evolving. And I don't know, I'm also not an expert on accountancy, but I suspect it probably hasn't changed that much. I don't know, IFRS 17 or something, the latest piece of stuff, of regulation maybe. But I think at its heart, it hasn't evolved, whereas marketing at its heart has continued to evolve. The principle's the same. But of course, the landscape, customer needs, the media landscape, and so on. And I think there's a paradox in all of this, which is that I think what a really core skill for marketing is curiosity. And curiosity means, what makes people tick? And I think marketers are great at applying that curiosity to what makes customers tick. A bit average in understanding what makes other senior stakeholders tick. I always think the role of the CMO is to sort of really understand what makes their stakeholder set tick, to influence, and actually bad at applying their curiosity to themselves. But interestingly, I think it's all the same skill of that open-mindedness and curiosity. But if more marketers applied more sort of discovery mechanics to themselves as they do to their customers, then that would be a good thing.
No, that's really interesting. I think it's interesting as well, looking at it in terms of the benefits also of not having such rigid career paths. We've talked in the past about how we're able to bring new and different people into our industry. And often I think that is as a result of the fact that we have so many different pathways to pursue and different ways of approaching things. So, on the one hand, professionalizing the industry is fantastic for the credibility in the boardroom. But we need to, I think, create a balance of that professionalization with that continued openness and ability to bring in new and different people to be able to thrive. And, going back to that core curiosity, taking that as the starting point to build the skills around that, really helping us to democratize talent, which is obviously something, you've done a lot of. And I think that's super interesting when it comes to upskilling as well. So, you know, how can we maintain that openness, that building diverse and inclusive teams, but providing a kind of structure, the direction that enables them to forge out a career path?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. So we've said there isn't a sort of an obvious professional structure, but I think structure is still important. You know, freedom within a framework is an old Marsism. And actually, just to dwell on Mars for a second, I was very fortunate to spend about 10 years there. And a couple of things I remember from there was that it was very explicit. The role of a leader is to build leaders. I mean, that was called out as a stated primary objective. And then also, kind of, you could do almost any training and development you wanted. Well, if it was registered in your personal development plan, which means that you needed to have one, and you needed to be having an ongoing conversation with your line manager. So Daniel's in the team. I do incessantly go on about, if you don't have a PDP, then don't expect anything to come your way. If you do, almost anything's possible, but it just doesn't happen by chance. So I think Mars was a really key influence. So to go back in time a little bit, but around the structure point, it is the responsibility of the marketing leaders to create a framework of what skills are expected. So 2.5 years ago, when we went into an agile transformation, we were very explicit. Here's the skills matrix. Here's the skills that we really need for you and the organization. And here's, beginner, intermediate, advanced, and expert, and so on. And then we just recently refreshed on that to really double down on data literacy. And so I think without that, anything could, any road will take you there. What does good look like? It's all too ambiguous. So I think there needs to be some form of structure so people can understand what a pathway might look like. So they're not guessing. And that absolutely means that the leader of the team needs to understand that is for them and their leadership team to be clear about what's needed.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something, as we're trying to support the industry through this, kind of the three things that we talk about are direction, support and structure. And I think that speaks to the points that you've been mentioning in terms of the role of the leader, in terms of creating that direction and the support to get there. But I think, the onus being on the individual to create a level of structure within their week or within the approach. But yes, I think absolutely getting that balance right is critical, I think, for success around this. Do you think, you were just talking about data literacy? I'm quite curious in terms of, because there's huge amounts of research saying quite different things in this space about the particular skills that are lacking. Some research is pointing to branding, creative and craft skills and people not being able to write copy anymore. Some is pointing to data analytics and data literacy. Do you see, in terms of the people coming through into your teams or just more broadly in the industry, the quality of the work even, where you think we might be missing particular skills or weak in certain areas?
Yeah, I mean, there's sort of two parts to this. One is the context within which marketing finds itself, and they need to be credible from a data point of view. And then there's just sort of the functioning of the team, people being effective. I mean, if I talk to the first one, we take insurance. I was talking to one of our handlers in the large and complex loss team in Birmingham a couple of weeks ago. And it's a really sad story. There was a chef, did a night shift, was very tired, picked his son up from school, and caused a head-on collision and actually killed his son and put 2 people on ventilators for the rest of their lives. That claim will cost us £37 million. So at the sharp end, insurance is pretty sharp. And so in our industry, it's not like a Mars bar. We make it for 20p, we sell it for 50 to you, me and everybody. In insurance, you don't know if somebody's going to cost you nothing or potentially £37 million. And so it is a very numerate-based profession. There's a high degree of data literacy. So unless marketing is showing up, being really focused on return on investment and knowing its commercial impact and its numbers, it will be seen as a colouring function. So that's thing number one. Thing number two, if we're looking to be agile and we're looking for autonomy in squads and for independence and empowerment, then we don't want to have a huge central data science function that answers all questions, including the most basic. So this is not somebody who's never really been into data suddenly becoming a PhD data scientist, but it's about self-sufficiency in and around data and utilization of data that's available as more and more becomes available. So it's about maybe moving, up a tier or two to be more data literate as part of an organization-wide movement, where we think that data is a source of competitive advantage. And we do have more than our competitors, so we should be getting on and using it. So I think it manifests at a number of levels, but it's inescapable that we're living in a more data-rich world. And so that's the particular train that I don't think anybody can avoid, which is why we're looking in the second half of the year to double down on data apprenticeships, utilizing our levy a bit more, because I think everybody can do a bit of upskilling in and around data.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's quite interesting you're talking to the role of data in terms of showcasing marketing's worth. And I think obviously measurement and proving the value of marketing is was a big topic for us at the moment, that we're trying to make measurement meaningful. And I think in terms of the skill sets to build that credibility. So, what the premise of our discussion was really about how upskilling can really champion business growth. And I think, when you're looking to those skills that are showcasing the value of marketing in the boardroom, that is obviously going to boost the credibility of our profession if we're able to talk the language of the boardroom. So I think it is quite interesting when you're looking at the craft of marketing and then the business of marketing in terms of the skills needed to almost climb the ladder, I guess, and have that credible voice.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think there's absolutely a 1-2, which is only through showing your ROI, commerciality, and your advertising, the core of marketing, your advertising spend, do you get to the second thing, which is to move from chief marketing officer to chief growth officer, or from a marketing function that's driving demand to a marketing function that's starting to shape the future of the business. Yeah. And for a marketing function will default to a comms function unless it lifts itself up and out of that. But you've got to show the commerciality around comms to even have the legitimacy to be in those conversations at all. So yeah, the prospect of becoming a chief growth officer or a growth function, demand generation function beyond today is probably what we all would like to do, shape the future of the business. But you just don't have any credibility in that conversation unless you're looking after your housekeeping in terms of commerciality.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting. Claire from Deloitte is agreeing with your comments about individuals taking ownership of their own development and that really being key. But I think, if we're talking about upskilling being in part the answer towards business growth, what do you think businesses can do to make upskilling more effective, and how, I think something you've done very successfully at DLG is about building learning cultures, so making that part of the environment. What would you advise businesses, those that feel they're maybe at kind of the very beginning of this journey, where to start and how to start building this culture of learning? Yeah,
really good question. No silver bullet. I think there's a number of things that we've done, and it's not all just marketing, frankly, but some things that work. So we have OKRs as part of our agile thing, and one of our people objectives is that everybody should have at least a day, a quarter focused on learning. So that kind of gets you to about your hour a week as an expectation, not as a, like if you can be bothered, but as an expectation. So this is a little bit, the equivalent of putting your money where your mouth is. We need to make people know that that's an expectation. So that's one thing. And another thing is that when we talk about performance management, it's 50% the what, 50% the how. And clearly a key part of how is how are you progressing your skills, your behaviors, and so on. So I think that's an important thing as well. So I mean, we've been doing that for years now, so it seems sort of obvious, but in many cases, performance management is purely about the what. And it makes it harder to find legitimacy to put focus on development. It's really interesting when I talk to Penny, our CEO, she says that even applies for her, that she needs to be curious and learning and developing. to foster that environment. But in the end, it does all come down to people building a habit, which is why I really like the thought of micro upskilling. In that, you know, I think you've got some great stats about the recall of repetition from repetition. It makes obvious. It seems so obvious that actually, rather than thinking I'm going to go on a training course next March for a couple of days, you know, to go regular at it. It's very much the crux of apprenticeships, isn't it? That, you know, regular learning just seems to be the sort of the judo move in all this. It doesn't make it so onerous and doesn't build up to big events. It's just a natural thing to do on an ongoing basis.
Yeah, exactly, and that's what we're finding, and it's interesting. So, you know, we're starting to advocate, we're starting a pilot in terms of this hour a week. You know, how that works, but the biggest, you know, it's been really well received, because I think particularly at the moment when teams are stretched, everyone's trying to do more with less. Sending people out on day-long courses just isn't feasible. So, you know, being able to do an hour a week, have that kind of more structured approach, and having permission to do that is super important. And I think going back to your first point about putting your money where your mouth is, this is something that we're pretty committed to. So as you're aware, we've got the DMA code, which is very much about putting the customer front and central. And we're now in the process of introducing a people principle into that code. And ideally, and this is all being consulted at the moment, so nothing definitive, but the ideal scenario but will be within that code will be asking members to commit to that hour a week micro upskilling as part of that people principle, but also looking to diversity and equity inclusion as being a core commitment within that people principle as well. So looking at it from both sides in terms of really investing in people and ensuring people are real drivers, because I think, you know, we obviously talk a lot about being customer first, but I think it's really interesting in terms of treating your people very much as your customers, and ensuring that the same rules apply. And it'd be quite interesting to hear your thoughts on that, because I know in terms of how you build your teams and invest in your teams, it very much echoes that.
Yeah, well, I think, Rachel, you're essentially getting to sort of what's the employee value proposition. You know, why would I come and work somewhere? Particularly post Great Resignation, people are being much more choiceful. And I heard Zed Al-Qassab from Channel 4 talk about he hopes that Channel 4 marketing is a place where people go to do the best work of their career. I thought that was really lovely. And I can't literally steal it because it's his mantra. But I hope that people who come to work in marketing in the teams that I lead, they come and can have a chance to reach their full potential, or give them the best possibility to reach their full potential. And that's what I say to people when they join the team, and that's what I say quite regularly. And for me, my big hate is people don't get a chance to reach their full potential. And so I think, you know, kind of as a marketing leader, you've got to wholeheartedly believe in something like that and make it happen. And it isn't one single act. It is consistency and being repetitive about that message. So yeah, but ultimately, I think when people are thinking about where they want to go and work or where they want to stay, they're asking, is this somewhere that I will learn? Somewhere that I'll do well, but also somewhere that I will learn. And so, yeah, I mean, if those organisations that don't bother, they'll really struggle to hold on to the best talent. And so there's an liberating effect here, I think.
We're absolutely seeing that at the moment as well. And it'll be interesting now how that fares. But I think particularly at a time when people are really struggling with talent, we're seeing that as being a key element of why people are leaving. They're just not being invested in. They don't feel they're getting the skills they need to develop. So in a competitive talent marketplace, it does feel like it's become it's business critical more than it perhaps used to be seen as an optional luxury, training your staff. Now, you know, and in terms of driving responsible growth, I think, you know, again, coming back at it from a DMA perspective, we're about creating responsible marketing. And if your team isn't trained up on the latest best practice, you know, in terms of doing the best thing by your customer, you know, it's super important to the work that you're producing. So it's something that we feel really now has to be a critical part of leading a team. And it's interesting, Tony, hi Tony, he's joined us from WW. They've just joined the pilot actually. So thanks Tony to help us, you know, understand what the challenges might be. But Tony's talking here in his comment about expectation, and it's not just something that is an option anymore. If it's baked into your annual reviews with your teams, making it part of the working process and the working week, Tony's saying it becomes a healthy habit, which I think is so true. So it'll be interesting to see, and we're actually looking for more companies to join that pilot. So we obviously need big brands, SMEs, we need to look at agencies, the lot. So anyone wants to join that pilot, please give me a shout on LinkedIn, just give me a message and we can have a look at getting you involved, because I think it's going to be interesting to uncover where the challenges do lie. You know, we've set up, hopefully, an easy to access platform for our members to dip in and out of bite-sized training through the IDM, but you know how we can structure that and how we can make it engaging. You know, I think one of the things that we do find is you can give permission, but actually the day job gets in the way. So I don't know, Mark, in terms of how, you know, carving time out in your diary maybe is an obvious way of saying that's my hour a week, no one touch it. But urgent meetings come, you know, in all the time, don't they? How would you suggest that we can make this a critical part of the working week?
Yeah, I mean, I think it does come from the personal development plan, which gives legitimacy. It means that your people manager is on board, signed up to it. I mean, if people work I don't know, 35-hour week, 40-hour week, that hour a week needs to make you 2.5% more effective to pay back. So the numbers are pretty compelling. I mean, even 2 hours a week, you only have to be 5% more effective. So you'd hope, you know, that over time you'd become much more than 2 or 2.5 or 5% effective. So I think the business case is compelling, but it's the legitimacy to be able to say that this is a good investment for me and it's a good investment for the company. So it's not a selfish thing; it's a mutual thing.
Yeah,
and it's got to be a win-win. A company prospers if its individuals are more valuable to themselves and to their organization. But I know practically, of course, day by day is tricky, and this is where it requires, you know, good old-fashioned focus, determination, resilience, commitment. But so much easier if the PDP is in place, because you know what you're building towards. What are the specific gaps? Daniel has actually asked a good question. You know, should I focus on one thing? Should I do lots of different things? Well, you know, the obvious answer is it really depends upon what your PDP objectives are. And any good PDP has done all the upfront insight of what am I good at? What do I enjoy? What do I like? What are some of the challenges I've got? What are some of the new skills I need to develop? But then drills down into 2, no more than 3 key things that over the next 6 or 12 months I want to be better at in these specific ways, so that it all ladders up. This is not the structure of an accountancy exam approach, but it's not flouncy or random. It's still got to have some specific destinations in mind.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's finding that balance, isn't it? Scott is suggesting having a program and a way of tracking and viewing progress that builds that learning habit. And I know Scott's spoken in the past about some amazing things they do at IBM in terms of motivating and almost gamifying that learning engagement, and actually looking beyond perhaps what's seen as formal learning and looking more at the informal learning. And we, again, talk a lot about that at the DMA, you know, judging some awards, coming along to council meetings, round tables, peer-to-peer learning, and encouraging people to look up a little bit more. I think, you know, sometimes there's a tendency for marketers to be very much heads down, and, you know, it's our role as the DMA really to get people to look up and about and fuel that curiosity. And I guess in terms of building that habit, Scott's asking, how do you see micro upskilling playing a part here? How can we build that into the broader learning range, I guess?
Well, I think the answer, I think, is that micro skilling as a device it makes it a habit very deliberately, because it's, as an hour a week, it's like 21 days to create a habit or something like that, or 21, I don't know. I've heard 30, I've heard 40, whatever it is, but different numbers, because it's about it's based in neuroscience, isn't it? The first time you do anything new, from a neuroscience point of view, is like hacking through a rainforest with a machete. It's sweaty work. The second time, it's a little bit easier. And a little bit easier, and then a path emerges, and then a track, and then a road, and then a motorway, and then a superhighway. That is exactly the process of creating memory patterns and structures in our brains. And so it's only through repetition that we get there. It's the same for memory or skill or whatever it is, behaviors. And so micro skilling is a nice way to keep firing that structure of the brain, I think. I'm no neuroscientist, but it seems like micro-skilling is a really good answer to the problem of how to create momentum.
Yeah, no, exactly. I think that's it. And I think it also, to me, feels very accessible. So I think one of the things that you often hear and see is that you need to be part of a big infrastructure, a big brand, to benefit from kind of the more structured approach and direction that, to training and development. But I think this is something, an approach that works as well in SMEs as it does in big brands. And I think, looking to the DMA's membership, which obviously very much covers, everyone from the big brands through to, the startup agencies, it's finding an approach to upskilling and building credibility within our industry that's accessible to all. So I think, micro upskilling does feel achievable for everyone. And I think, when we're looking to particularly SMEs, that constant pushback is time and carving out time. And as you're saying, if you're making that a small amount of time, a regular habit, the build over time, it is pretty immense in the end. So I think, do you see that there should be any differences in approach depending on the type of company you're in? Whether that's the type in terms of brand, agency, marketing services, or size of company. Do you see approaches being different, or do you think that we can achieve this in a similar way?
Gosh, really good question, because some things will vary, but I suppose the fundamentals shouldn't, in terms of being able to find time to focus. I'm very interested to hear what IBM do in terms of gamification. I don't think there's any, again, no silver bullets, but hopefully good people will gravitate towards good organisations that put value and emphasis upon this. And I think sort of the flip on your question is, if you're in an organisation that doesn't, you should maybe reflect on that. I mean, it's either, you're going to have to do it on your own terms and it's just a little bit harder, or do I want to go somewhere that has mutuality as a principle at its heart as relates to people development? I don't know. I mean, we're sort of getting into a difficult space of, this is not always easy to navigate through. Yeah. And there might sometimes be organizational drag, because, even in a great organization, you may not work for a great people manager who doesn't value and respect your talents, which is why I sort of come out of that conversation thinking, mindfulness has been a topic for eons. And somebody once said to me a while ago, "What have you ever tried mindful running?" Because I run a bit. What does that mean? Well, you just sort of, you just really make sure that you're enjoying it. You're really focused, cut out the noise, just zone in and make it your time. And now I try and do that. And I get so much more from running. And I think self-development is a little bit like that. I'm not to get too spiritual about it all, but there is a thing about, this is my time for me, to benefit me, I benefit the organisation, and really to sort of enjoy it and immerse it. And I think that sort of a very mindful approach to self-learning may help to buffer against either, the distraction on time, or an organisation that isn't really as in it as you are. I don't know, never had the thought before, but maybe there's something in it.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. And exactly my take on running as well. That's why I run, is to have some headspace. It's the one time no one can talk to me, and I can't talk to anyone because I'm not that good at running. So, but it's about and I've carved that habit out. So it's a similar approach, I think, absolutely, that it isn't just Yeah, about career growth. There's so many other benefits that come off the back of this. Actually, I've just noticed Sheila's given us some specific stats here on doing something 7 times creates a habit. So I guess, yeah, with 7 weeks into the process, maybe that's how long the pilot should be, actually, thinking about it, if that's the case and people are doing an hour a week. So I guess going back to the core premise of our chat, which was around learning and upskilling, driving business growth. We are in for a tricky year ahead, I think, if the Bank of England predictions are all correct. How would you advise business leaders, marketing leaders, to approach the next year as it comes to upskilling? Is, you know, upskilling we think is part of the solution in terms of driving business growth, but I guess it's for them to understand how and how to champion that at the boardroom.
So you could say, wow, now's the time to batten down the hatches. This is survival mode, you know, and that's not wrong, but I think that's only part of the answer. And the other part is, you know, this is normal Darwinian forces. A bit like I said, you know, it's not what you know, it's am I learning fast enough? It's not the survival of the strongest, it's those most capable to adapt. This is a time to double down on learning, because to emerge successfully from what we're about to go through is going to require you know, new skills, new behaviours. So I think you're right. You said it. It's part of the answer. And I think at the margin, those companies who just hunker down and don't keep investing in their people are less likely to survive, either because their people, their current people, don't have the future skills, or they lose the people who want to develop the future skills. So it's you know, it's a shakeout, isn't it? And that is what recessions do. They separate those who are going to get themselves fit for the future and those who aren't. So not to say it's easy. I mean, none of this is easy. If it was, it would all, you know, we wouldn't be even sat here if it was all a walk in the park. But I think you're spot on that need to have a growth mindset, particularly through the tough times, and not a fixed mindset, least of all during the tough times.
Yeah. And how would you suggest, so as we enter into the pilot and we're getting feedback on the impact of doing this, what would you think the kind of the key measurement areas that we should be looking at to see that, to show that it's worth it, that it's building growth, it's building momentum? There's obviously longer term stats that you could look in terms of staff retention, staff happiness. I know we were talking about this in terms of actually, let's get back to the basics. Do people actually enjoy working with you? Is this something that's gonna motivate people and make coming to work, or, you know, getting up and sitting in front of your computer every day an enjoyable process? What do you think should be the key measures that we look to as we start to implement this industry-wide?
Well, you know, there has to be a value to it, doesn't there? I mean, it's, you know, return on investment can be measured in many different ways. You know, I'm no expert, but I would suspect when you get into, you'll have lead and lag measures. I'm literally making this up as we go along. I mean, the lag measures will be, you know, do people stay in an organisation? Because if you lose talent because you're not investing in it, then that's got to be a big thing. But you know, there needs to be some form of ROI metrics, and that will relate to people's outputs or effectiveness or longevity or you know, ability to create value in an organisation. I don't know. Honestly, Rachel, that's a bit
no, it's a hard one. Sorry, I'm a bit of a curveball throwing at you, but I love that you can.
No, that's okay. But it comes back to,
so wise.
but it comes back to you know, again, the language of the board requires return on investment, because you know, there is a cost to this, which in theory, which is the cost of people's time not doing something else. But the same as with marketing spend per se, the reframe of that is no, it's an investment because there's a return. And much as wherever I've gone, I've always fought really hard to make sure that marketing spend is at the back of the cuts queue because it has a registered return. The same would be true of investing in people. And so make it the hardest thing to cut rather than the easiest thing to cut.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and it's quite interesting because it's similar challenges in terms of, you know, I think immediately you can think of lots of long-term measures, you know, in terms of creating this more customer-centric approach, the responsible growth, all of those things, looking at best practice implementation. But yeah, I guess it's, you know, when exactly the same as marketing, everyone wants those short-term results. You know, what can I see now a month later from doing it 2 months later? And I think some of the return on this is perhaps slightly more long-term.
Right. So marketers need to be able to tell stories. I mean, it's sort of back to basics, isn't it? And I love the metaphor of super tankers and speedboats. And so, you know, super tankers carry a lot of weight and make a big impact, but takes a long time and they don't change direction very quickly. Speedboats is the sort of creates all sort of noise and fizz and excitement and so on. And you need both. And it's a bit like when CMOs start in their jobs. The first 18 months is survivalism because you need to show some impact. But during that time, you absolutely have to sow the seeds for the longer term benefits. And so I think, you know, there's tactics around this, heroing specific individuals, case studies, you know, certain deliverables. But underneath the hood, you know, you're more focused on the progression of the lag measures because that's the true change. But you know, you've got to create a story along the way. I mean, and surely marketers should be able to do that.
Yeah, no, exactly. No, I think they're very wise words. I think we're going to have to start wrapping up. Just checking we haven't got any more comments and questions coming through. So thank you so much, Mark. It's been really good chatting to you. I think thanks everyone for joining us. As I mentioned, please do get in touch if you want to take part in our micro upskilling pilots. It essentially involves committing to 1 hour a week of training within your marketing teams and feeding back on how that goes. You'll have access to our learning platform to help you do that as well. So please do get in touch if that's something that you'd be interested in doing. Thanks again, Mark. Been really lovely chatting to you. Have a great rest of your Friday. Lovely weekend. I think the sun's going to carry on shining and not be too hot. So we're not going to complain. It's the good old English we'd like to do.
Yeah. Thanks, Rachel. Happy to be here and good weekends, everybody.
Thank you. Take care.